Hey everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Shunguang, the Uma Musume who relies on her enhanced state's extremely powerful attacks to deal massive damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, wenjins, and possible themes. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information that will be shown is from the creator experience server, so things can still change when her banner drops. Now let's quickly look at her basics in her normal state. First of all, she has a standard 4 basic attack combo string, which is one of the main ways to build her Qingming Sword Force. Aside from this, she also has an infinite range attack activated by holding the attack button, which is useful for dealing with enemies that sometimes become unreachable or building her Qingming Sword Force. Now let's look at her normal state special attacks, starting with her regular special, which has an inbuilt dodge, meaning it consumes 1 dodge chance per use and will get stronger if you trigger a perfect dodge with it. Now, similar to Evelyn, you do want to be using this special to dodge over her regular dodge counter since it builds her Qingming Sword Force significantly quicker. As for her normal state's EX special, it's a standard high damage attack that gives her 1 point of Qingming Sword Force. It's also worth noting that if you press basic during this attack, she'll do a plunge finisher for even more damage. But moving on, her main resource is Qingming Sword Force, which has a max of 6 points. You normally build points through attacking with any of her abilities in her normal state. However, her normal state's ult instantly gives 6 full points, while her EX special gives 1. And once you reach 6 points, it gives you the ability to transform into her really cool Enlightened Mind state via 2 methods. The first is her unique entry skill, which can be activated by switching into her from off-field or by holding basic while she's on-field. The second is her normal state's ult, which instantly activates her Enlightened Mind state by giving her 6 Qingming Sword Force. But just note that pre-M2, you should avoid using this when Shunguang has over 3 Qingming Sword Force to avoid wasting the one she currently has, since her core passive can only store 3 extra points. Aside from activating her enhanced state, these 2 attacks also puts her airborne, but more on that later, since they also activate her Ether Veil Verdict, which lasts for up to 16 seconds or until her transformation ends. But this timer does pause when you switch out from her. Now this Ether Veil is different from the one Lucia, Yidhari, and Zhao provides, because instead of buffing HP, it replaces the stun damage multiplier with a Veil Vulnerability damage multiplier. And the insane thing is, this damage multiplier is active for her entire transformation without you having to stun an enemy. And it is based off the enemy's current stun damage multiplier. But it does get deactivated when you switch out from her, and it only reactivates when you switch back. And this Veil Vulnerability damage multiplier also benefits from stun damage multiplier bonuses like Qingyi's or Dialin's. However, it can only have a max of 210%, meaning for some enemies and content, the bonuses from those units can easily be wasted. TLDR, it basically makes the stun damage multiplier active without stuns while she's on field and in her enhanced state. But it's worth reiterating that this completely replaces stun damage multipliers during or outside of stuns while Shunguang is on field. Now her transformation also turns all of her attacks into her unique Hone Edge element, which, just like Yishuan's Auric Ink, is basically just a fancy physical element that has a different anomaly meter and still triggers assault and flinch, while benefiting from physical damage buffs. But what makes Hone Edge unique is that it deals 50% more miasma purification damage during the miasma phase, making her perfect for bosses like the Defiler. Aside from an element change, her transformation also has completely new abilities, starting with her basics, which is now a 3-string combo that can block enemy attacks on the 3rd hit. But if you use her basic attack 3 when she has at least 1 Qingming Sword Force, she will instead use her Skyward Ascent attack, which makes her airborne. Now Shunguang can only go airborne during her transformation after using the abilities shown on screen, with some of them needing at least 1 Qingming Sword Force to execute. But what's important about going airborne is that it allows Shunguang to execute her Sunderlight combo, which is a high damage 3 ability combo string. The combo starts with Sunderlight, which is a 2-hit attack. But you can either go through with the entire ability or press special or dodge anytime during the ability to skip a portion of the attack and follow up into the next Sunderlight attack in the combo. which is Sunderlight Annihilation, which gets stronger if you have 2 Qingming Sword Force for it to consume when using it, on top of it triggering a block if you get hit during its animation. But aside from this, if you press the special button right after the attack ends, it consumes 1 Qingming Sword Force to launch a portion of her Soaring Light EX special without interrupting the Sunderlight combo. It's also worth noting that Sunderlight Annihilation grants the culmination buff if it consumes 2 Qingming Sword Force, which is indicated by the blinking diamond or the white buff marker under Shunguang. And it's consumed instead of 1 point of Qingming Sword Force when EX Special Soaring Light is used during the Sunderlight combo or by itself. So basically, culmination negates the cost of using 1 EX Special in the middle of the Sunderlight combo. Now after using Sunderlight Annihilation, whether or not you use an EX Special after it, if you have at least 1 Qingming Sword Force, you can follow up into Sunderlight Maximum by pressing Basic to end the Sunderlight combo. But if you have Qingming Sword Force, you can press Special right after using this attack to use another portion of her Soaring Light EX Special, which follows up into Skyward Ascent to go airborne, allowing you to repeat the Sunderlight combo again. Now there are 2 versions of this combo. The first is the long combo, which can only be triggered by only using her EX Special Soaring Light at the end of Sunderlight Maximum to loop the combo 2.5 times, ending with a third, weaker version of Sunderlight Annihilation. While the second is a bit shorter, where you only use her EX Special during her first Sunderlight Maximum and the second Sunderlight Annihilation to end the combo with a second Sunderlight Maximum. The longer combo of course deals more damage, but it might be too long to execute in certain scenarios, so just use whichever one fits the current situation. The damage difference isn't too big to cause any sort of issue. It's also worth noting that you should always use EX Special Return to Dust or her Enhanced Ult right after consuming all Qingming Force points. This is in order to deal a high damage finisher to exit the state, so you can immediately start building Qingming Force points again. Speaking of which, we can now look at her Enhanced States EX Specials, the first of which is her Charge EX Special, Soaring Light, which is the alternative to her Sunderlight combos. This consumes Qingming Sword Force rapidly while dealing damage for as long as you hold the EX Special button or until you run out of points. And if you consume all 6 points, this attack does get significantly stronger. Anyway, moving on to her EX Special Return to Dust, it is used by holding the EX Special without any Qingming Sword Force or by pressing the Alt button anytime during the transformation. This ends her transformation, but it deals a high damage attack before doing so, making it a great finisher after consuming all of her points. Just note, this can only be used if you did not enter her transformation using her regular ult, and make sure not to use it if she has any Qingming Force points to avoid wasting them. Now her regular special in this state also has an inbuilt dodge. But if you have Qingming Sword Force, it can trigger a perfect dodge that combos into Sunderlight Maximum that follows up into Skyward Ascent to put her airborne. As for her Enhanced States ult, it can only be used if you use your normal ult to transform into her Enhanced State, and it automatically ends the transformation upon use, so it's only advised to use it after consuming all Qingming Sword Force. And fun fact, this is an extremely high damage ult to the point that it has the highest damage multiplier out of any ability in the game, even beating out Yixuan and Miyabi's ult in terms of damage by a mile. But finally, for her core passive, aside from the stuff I've already talked about, it also gives her the Unity buff at the start of combat that gives her a 30% crit rate and 25% damage buff for the entire battle, which makes her significantly easier to build. It also grants her bearer stacks if she gains Qingming Sword Force, even if she's already at max stacks. This can have up to 3 stacks and is consumed upon exiting her Enhanced State to give her 1 Qingming Sword Force per stack consumed, which is neat since it makes point overflow less of an issue, especially when using her regular state's ult to transform. Now for her additional ability, it needs a support or defense unit to activate. And whenever a squad member activates an Ether Veil, Shunguang gains 3 points of Qingming Sword Force. But if she's already at max or is in her transformation, it gets converted to bearer stacks instead. Just note, refreshing Ether Veils while they're still up also triggers this ability, and for some reason, Shunguang activating her Ether Veil Verdict during her transformation can't trigger this ability. So she doesn't get a point refund after her transformation, and is reliant on Xiao or future Etherville attack supports to take advantage of this ability. But moving on for her ability prio, I recommend leveling up her core passive first, then her basics, ult, and special, and then her assists, and finally dodge. You can just ignore dodge since you want to be using her regular special to dodge in order to build points faster. But with her kit out of the way, let's talk about her Mindscapes. Her M1 grants 6 Qingming Sword Force at the start of combat, and the Unity buff from her core passive now gives an additional 10% damage buff for a total of 30% on top of a new 20% Def Ignore buff. This allows Shunguang to transform right at the start of combat, allowing her to deal big damage right from the get-go. But overall, it's just a pretty simple but notable damage upgrade for her due to more buffs. While her M2 increases the max stack of Bearer to 6, while Culmination's max stacks increases from 1 to 9. And it also enables each point of Qingming Sword Force consumed to now grant 1 stack of Culmination during her enhanced state, and her Soaring Light EX specials now ignore 40% of the enemy's defense. First of all, this enables you to worry even less about overcapping on Qingming Sword Force, letting you use her normal ult even if she's already at 6 points. This also enables you to not only use Soaring Light after every Sunderlight Annihilation and Maximum for even more damage, it also allows you to do a longer combo in her transformation by allowing her to use her Charge EX special Soaring Light directly after a double Sunderlight combo. As for her M4, it gives her 1000 decibels at the start of combat, while increasing Ether Veil Verdict's damage multiplier cap from 110 to 200%, meaning the total multiplier cap increases from 210% to 300% while her transformation is up. Nothing really too insane, but it does allow her to benefit fully from stun damage multiplier bonuses from units like Qingyi or Dialin, or even against content or enemies that naturally have high stun damage multipliers. And finally, for her M6, it grants 2 stacks of Lantern Swish at the start of combat, and 1 every time she enters her transformation. Lantern Swish stacks up to 4 times, but she can consume 3 to convert her EX special Return to Dust into her enhanced ultimate. Aside from this, her enhanced state's EX special Return to Dust and her enhanced ult will now deal an additional 1500 attack as damage. And with her Mindscapes out of the way, let's talk about her possible Wenjins. Shunguang's signature Cloud Cleave Radiance gives 48% crit damage and 20% physical resignor just by equipping it. Aside from this, if the wearer activates an Ether Veil, they gain a 20% crit damage and damage buff for 40 seconds. This of course has a refreshable duration, so it will pretty much have permanent uptime right after her first transformation. And in general, it's just a pretty simple damage upgrade to consider for her if you want to main her, but as an attack agent, she has a lot of options. A pretty good, easily accessible 5-star option is the Brimstone, with it giving her up to 58% attack at full stacks, and it's not too hard to maintain uptime of its effects due to Shunguang spamming a lot of basics. However, it does have some caveats. First is that Shunguang will most likely be ran with attack buffers like Xiao or Astra, so she'll end up getting a lot of attack to the point that it easily gets diluted and give diminishing returns. And second, it doesn't give crit stats, but that's not too detrimental with Shunguang since she already gets loss of crit rate, so investing in more crit damage from substats isn't too hard. Now for other 5-star options, any Wenjin that gives crit stats can work as decent options. However, there are a few things to note. First, these are only crit stat sticks, and Shunguang cannot fully activate their effects to get their bonuses. However, there are a few things to note. Most of these are only crit stat sticks, and Shunguang cannot fully activate their effects to get their full bonuses. Second, Shunguang gets 69.4% crit rate already with her kit and the water balance set alone. So if you want to use a crit rate Wenjin, it becomes really easy to overcap with her crit rate from substats. So crit damage focused Wenjins are more preferred. And finally, out of all of them, she has 4 notable options. Severed Innocence for loss of crit damage, Heartstring Nocturne and Eclipse for loss of both crit rate and crit damage, making it significantly easier to build her, and finally Cordis Gemina for a few reasons. First, with Cordis, you can totally ignore crit rate substats since it puts her at 108% crit rate, allowing you to fully focus on crit damage and attack. Second, she can fully stack and benefit from most of this Wenjin's buffs, which gives her a 20% def ignore for her ult and basics, which of course makes up a big chunk of her damage. But its cons are it causes her to overcap on crit rate, its electric damage bonus is useless for her, and it doesn't buff her EX specials. Now moving on to 4-star options, it's the usual 3. A good free-to-play option is Mercado Desire simply because it gives 20% crit rate with its main stat. But sadly, you'll most likely only get 9.6 attack from its effects since triggering anomalies in her teams is pretty rare. But just note, it becomes extremely easy to overcap with crit rate while using this Wenjin, but it also just lets you focus on crit damage substats mainly. But if you don't have it, Starlight Knight is also pretty good for a 44.2% attack buff. But sadly, said attack bonus can easily become diluted if you run her with a lot of attack buffers. Well, that and you'll want to be using her special attacks dodge instead of her dodge counter, meaning you'll have to go out of your way to use her dodge counter every 12 seconds to get this Wenjin's full buffs at the cost of a bit slower Qingming Sword Force build-up. And lastly, Cannon Rotor is also a decent option for its bonus crit rate and bonus attack. However, its speed takes a while to get copies of, and just like Mercado Desire, it makes it easy to overcap on crit rate. But with possible Wenjins out of the way, let's talk about drive discs. For the 4-piece set, her best set is the new Water Balance set, which gives her a 10% physical damage buff from its 2-piece. And when there's an Ether Veil active, the wearer gets a 10% crit rate buff, but if they ever leave the Ether Veil, the buff will linger for 15 seconds. Aside from this, if the wearer is an attack unit and they activate an Ether Veil, their attack and crit rate increases by 10% for 30 seconds, and it's refreshable, so it will pretty much have permanent uptime. But overall, it gives her a staggering 20% crit rate, which puts her at 69.4% with no substats, making her extremely easy to build. This set is pretty much made for Shunguang, so it's really the only set you should work towards farming for her. But its only con is that it's a new set, so you can't really pre-farm for it. As for 2-piece sets, you can use Woodpecker for bonus crit rate, Branch for more crit damage, Fang Metal for more physical damage, Hormone Punk or Astral Voice for more attack, or even Puffer Electro for more pen ratio. But out of all of these, the best is Branch to make her easier to build with lots of crit damage, or Fang Metal since her kit doesn't really have too much in terms of damage percent buffs since she only really has 25% from her core passive. And again, for the nth time, she already has a lot of crit rate, so Woodpecker gets heavily devalued depending on your current setup and substats, since it becomes really easy to overcap on crit rate when using it. But with her possible drive discs out of the way, let's talk about stats. For main stats, you want attack for slot 6, physical pen or attack for slot 5, and finally crit damage for slot 4. Now for the slot 4 main stat, crit damage is preferred since she already gets tons of crit rate, especially if you're using a crit rate Wenjin or a 2-piece Woodpecker. And more often than not, it will probably cause you to overcap on crit rate if you use a crit rate slot 6. However, if you're not using a crit rate Wenjin or a Woodpecker 2-piece, you can just use a crit rate slot 6 since you can just ignore crit rate substats to fully focus on crit damage and attack stats. As to the slot 5 main stat, physical is the best one because like I said, in terms of damage percent, she only has her 25% damage buff from her core passive. However, pen ratio can work too if you can get significantly better substats with it, and it stacks well with other pen sources like an M1 Rena or Puffer Electro's 2-piece. But just note, if you run this with a defense shred source like Nicole, it will give diminishing returns. And lastly, attack is an option if you can't get good pen or physical main stats. As for substats, you mainly want to focus on crit damage first, then crit rate, then attack percent, and finally flat pen or attack. For minimum stat recommendations, I recommend getting as close as you can to 100% crit rate in battle to make her damage as consistent as possible. Again, as I kept yapping about, she already has 69.4% crit rate from her kit and the Water Balance set without substats. So you might as well get as close to 100% crit rate as you can, especially when considering that she also has other crit rate sources like those listed on screen. But just note, do not get more than 30.6% crit rate since it would cause her to overcap on the stat. As for attack, I recommend around 2,600 to 3,000 depending on the Wenjin and substats equipped. But more is always welcome, but make sure to balance your crit stats first. And just note, like I said earlier, you'll most likely run her with multiple attack buffers, so it's very easy to dilute the attack stat. And lastly, for crit damage, I recommend going from around 180 to 200% depending on your Wenjin. Since she already has tons of crit rate, it allows you to focus on higher crit damage goals like 200% without really sacrificing other stats too much. With her stats out of the way, let's talk about possible teammates. For starters, a really notable teammate for Shunguang is Zhao. She provides a pretty good 1000 attack buff and up to a 40% damage buff to help with Shunguang's damage on top of a bit of healing for survivability. But more importantly, she has the ability to apply and reapply an Ether Veil at a pretty good interval, which is great for helping Shunguang generate Qingming Force points thanks to her additional ability. Which of course lets her enter her enhanced state much more often, which of course results in more damage and is the main reason players would want to use Zhao with Shunguang over other supports with better buffs. And it's also worth noting that Zhao is currently the only unit that can activate an Ether Veil while providing meaningful buffs for Shunguang. And as an added bonus, she's also free, so everyone should have her whether they like it or not. But if you don't want to use Zhao or need another unit to run with her, you can use other supports as well, like those listed on screen. Now for stunners, well, due to her unique Ether Veil verdict, she doesn't really care about stuns, so a lot of them loses their value for Shunguang. This is due to its Veil Vulnerability Multiplier, replacing the regular stun damage multiplier while Shunguang is transformed on field and making it active without the enemy needing to be stunned. And yes, even if you stun the enemy, it still replaces the multiplier as long as Shunguang is on field. This basically takes away the point of running a stunner in Shunguang's teams, since she doesn't really need stuns to benefit from a stun damage multiplier. All because she could activate something similar herself with her transformation's Ether Veil. But some of them can still benefit her due to the utility or buffs they bring outside of stuns, so in other words, they'll just act like another support. And there are 3 notable ones that can somewhat compete with supports on top of providing her with the Mountain King set's buffs. Trigger with her signature's Defense Shred is essentially a higher debuff uptime Nicole that needs less quick swapping, meaning more field time for Shunguang to build her resources. Plus, her permanent stun damage multiplier does help Shunguang get higher Veil Vulnerability multipliers on top of helping with her damage outside of her transformation. While Yufufu is able to buff her ult massively while providing a decent crit damage buff. But the best stunner to run with her is actually Dial-In. She provides a good damage percent buff and bonus multipliers for Shunguang's Veil Vulnerability damage multiplier. But more importantly, she also converts chain attacks into ults, which is insane. Which of course increases the number of normal ults and transformations Shunguang can enter in battle. But just note, if you enter her transformation this way, you cannot trigger Shunguang's enhanced ult since it needs to have her normal ult consume 3000 decibels first. And if you want to trigger Shunguang's enhanced ult with Dial-In instead, make sure to only do it when you enter her transformation using her entry skill to avoid wasting decibels. Now for teams, it's pretty simple. You can run her in a double support team, focus on maximizing her damage through many buffs. Preferably one of the supports you're running is Zhao to get more transformations for Shunguang. However, if you don't want to use her, other supports like Astra can work just fine, no problem. But I highly recommend just using her though because she's free. But you can also use Shunguang in a traditional hyper carry team with a support and a stunner. But like I said, she doesn't really care about stuns, so make sure to only use any of the stunners I mentioned earlier since they have the utility to act as a good support. Now it's also worth noting that since she is an attack unit, she can work with Seed being capable of effectively buffing her. Now sadly, I wasn't able to test Seed plus Shunguang teams too much due to some time constraints due to the holidays. But from what I did test is that the team needs a lot of field time management between the two. And because of this, it is very advisable to use Zhao as the support for this team to make getting Shunguang's transformations more consistent. But now here's a chart comparing the performance of every Shunguang team I tried in the new Shiyu Defense Stage 5, since that now gives a numerical score too. Just note, this mode has a max score of 50k, so use that to gauge each team's performance. And keep in mind, every S-rank agent is at M0 and every A-rank agent is at M6, and all of them had their signatures except for Rina, who was at M1, mainly because her buffs were too short otherwise. This was tested with the Doppelganger Isolde stage with a physical weakness. But with that in mind, the scores you see here are due to many variables like my skill issue, so they are bound to change depending on your skill level, team builds, Wenjins, and more. But it should still give a good idea on how each team compared to each other. But that's about it. Personally, I'm definitely gonna be pulling for her because of how adorable she is. Seriously though, what type of Siren is she? An Uncle Techie horse, fox, or Tenguang? But I guess it doesn't really matter because she's adorable. But anyway, make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub. Now, on to the showcases, and please remember, I suck at this game.